I think that this election is going to come down to white women. And I hope we can get out of our own way. Yes. And we can just be cool with the fact that the first woman in the White House is not going to look like us. Because I think we've expected that. We all felt we were owed that, which we weren't. And I think that for a lot of white women, it's going to be the time to swallow our pride. And first of all, just understand that, like, for me, it's like, of course a Black woman is going to fix America, right? It makes so much sense to me that the people that understand oppression the best are the people who are most oppressed. I think it's so interesting that, like, other than straight white men, everybody feels like they're being represented now in this election. Of course, you have Tim Walz, DEI hire. But, like, you know, when it was President Barack Obama, I didn't see myself reflected in that. But when it's a woman, even as a white woman, I can see myself represented for the first time. And then all people of color, I think, can see themselves represented. And, you know, at least from this side, it feels like we were just gritting our teeth. You know, like, fine, we'll go with the other old white men because he's better than the felon. But as soon as it switched, I think the excitement that it has brought has been incredible.
Yeah. And I think that it, you know, anything that can bring out a bit of hope is a good direction to go in. I know, like, especially online and in certain, you know, discourse, it is a little nerve-wracking as a Black woman to have a Black woman be up there, because we do see ourselves there, right? But we also know how we get treated and how we are spoken to, and like the glass cliff theory of, you know, being put up in a position of power when things are going down and are terrible. That, of course, you know, it's like, it's the, I don't want to say double-edged sword, but it's precarious, and we don't want to be the mamala, right? Like, it's also just having like an eye on white feminism and making sure we keep anti-Blackness at the forefront of like awareness of our limitations, because very quickly, once people start feeling represented, then they feel they can speak for the group they're representing, and nobody should really be doing that. But we get excited, and I get it, but also being a Black person who cried and was very moved at Obama. That was my first time voting. I was 18. And then to watch what happened after, there are, you know, there's boundaries to where my hope goes. And also like remembering people are what's important. And that's what we want to, like, that's what I want to focus on. Like, people were able to kind of push this change, and people were able to make something happen, not like give all our agency and power over once we hand over our slip of agreement or whatever. You know, we can now, like, it's momentum I'd like to see. It's, you know.
Well said. And, you know, for our listeners, the glass cliff is something so important for us to all educate ourselves on. And the glass cliff, it can be multiple things. It can be when women or minorities take themselves out of competition because they're just too tired. That's how I describe why I got out of the military. Glass cliff. Right? Like, I'm just too exhausted to keep trying. But the glass cliff is also when women and or Black and brown people are given finally the CEO role, the leading role in a ship that is basically already sinking. And in this book, Mediocre by Ijeoma Olowu, she goes into it in detail. This whole book, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, is an excellent book to be reading right now. Hey, white women, especially if you are sleeping with a white man in your house and in your bed,
Absolutely.
right? Because I feel pretty strongly like you said, I'm a little scared. But from a different angle, I think that this election is going to come down to white women. And I hope we can get out of our own way and
Yes.
we can just be cool with the fact that the first woman in the White House is not going to look like us. Because I think we've expected that. We all felt we were owed that, which we
Mhm.
weren't. And I think that for a lot of white women, it's going to be the time to swallow our pride. And first of all, just understand that, like, for me, it's like, of course, a Black woman is going to fix America, right? It makes so much sense to me
Yeah.
that the people that understand oppression the best are the people who are most oppressed. And I say in my practice as a group behavior scientist, when, I talk about cults and bad groups, and people ask me, well, what do good groups look like? And I always say, I hope I'm part of that team and part of that discussion, but I don't
Mhm.
think the person leading a good group looks like me. Historically, we have not been
Absolutely.
the ones.
Right. There are limitations when you have the perspective and have been socialized as a white person. There are limitations to everything and every situation. And leading people is never going to be something that white people are going to be adept at, with hundreds of years of epigenetics going on and competition and scarcity and fear and paternalism, all of the tenets of white supremacy for generations and generations to the cellular level. Like, let's just go with the easier option and do with the group of the demographic, and the data shows Black women know how to best utilize resources within a community because they have had to humanize every group around them in order to survive. And they are raising the people that we are feeding. Like, it's just, let's go with what makes the most sense and not with what we've done historically,
Mm-hmm.
because
And I think
we're
you all have
gaslighting.
this. I think you all have this special gift of not marginalizing anyone. I think I've said this before on this podcast that I don't know that my daughter knows that someone other than a Black woman can be a medical professional, because we live in Maryland and everybody that she sees is a Black woman. And
Mm-hmm.
every time I see a Black woman come into the room, I'm relieved. I know
Yeah.
my daughter is going to get treated amazingly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but again, we want to be careful with that mamala thing, that other
Right.
thing of white women expecting Black women to take care of us, take care of our children, and be like our safety net.
Right. It's a line, right? And it's like it's always thinking back and checking our expectations. And I I've been messing around with this concept of believing Black women, or and believing ourselves versus believing in ourselves and believing in Black women, because I think it's almost designed to create a monolith and not realize Black women can be narcissists and cult leaders. Black women can be, problematic. They can be anti-Black towards Black patients. We had this issue on TikTok kind of go viral with a reality TV star who is also a gynecologist, an OBGYN. She's Black, but she has also had very anti-Black stances with her patients, and she came out and it was a very big deal. So it's like, we can get betrayed by our own as well. It's actually, but believing in something is how you center something, right? It's centering Black women and the impact without kind of assuming anything about each and every Black woman. Because years ago, I was not this version, and I wouldn't be believing everything I said, because we don't know what we don't know
Right.
about things we think we do know, even, so.
And that's also such a good point of reminding ourselves that, like, nobody should ever have to represent their entire demographic. And that is something that we do a lot to minorities. And let's get into that. It's so hard to find a pause point here. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our podcast, Hey, White Women, where White Woman Whisperer and I, Knitting Cult Lady, are deconstructing white supremacy like the cult that it is. Today, you may have guessed, we are going to be talking about Kamala Harris and everything involved in that. I just want to remind you, if you're listening to us as a podcast, please like and rate us, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you are. We almost have 1,000 downloads. It's getting exciting. Also, you can find these videos on YouTube at Knitting Cult Lady. Our last one got 20,000 views. So thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Oh,
It's going so well. And I'm going to start by telling you what I'm making, because I'm making we're both knitting and crocheting if you're only listening, but I'm making my coat for the inauguration. And
nice.
I thought about what I was going to make, and I decided I'm going to make a knitted cat lady coat. So it's going to be in Kamala Harris's favorite lime green, this shaggy thing. And then it's going to have like 10 or 15 of it's gonna have like 10 or 15 of these crochet amigurumi cats
Oh my
hanging on.
goodness. Oh,
I
I'm
might
so
make a little crochet couch for one of them to be lying on, just for shady Vance's,
Oh my
benefit.
goodness. That's a project.
It
I
is. That's why, I've got a couple months. Plus, I'm still
yeah,
making my Halloween outfit. I'm gonna be a rock and roll carrot. Um,
a rock and roll carrot. Okay.
I let my daughter pick my Halloween costumes, and she decided rock and roll carrot. So I took this like orange, like crochet jumpsuit that is kind of like clubwear, and I added pant legs to it in fluorescent colors, and now I'm making a crocheted wig out of all different colors of green, like fuzzy like this, braided, all this stuff. For sure, we'll see it on future episodes.
Oh,
And
so
I'm
excited.
still, working on Haley's scarf again and trying to understand what I'm going to do for your scarf again. But I have a pair of earrings that are going to go with your scarf again. So I'm like excited.
I mean, you work. You are working. Meanwhile, I am knitting this panel. It's just I'm thinking that I want to make like a cardigan out of it. I've never knit any item aside from just like a long thing and some squares, which I never put together into anything. But I'm thinking it'll be one panel and maybe it'll be a cardigan, and I'll do just like one big back panel with all this random color alignment. It's my first
I love
knitting.
how
I'm
we are
excited.
so in sync that we're both knitting today when every past one we've been crocheting. So good for us.
Look
Good
at
for
us.
us. And to those who are new, I am Daniella, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I have social media channels where I am the knitting cult lady or group behavior gal, and I talk about all things cults, how cults work, how coercive control really works. And one of the things that I have come up against in my own deconstruction and my own life is the fact that white supremacy is a major cult that we are all in America, and that white supremacy starts radicalizing you, started radicalizing me from the moment I set foot in the US at 15 years old as a white person. And one of the realizations I've had recently is that even though I have left the cult of white supremacy, I've had the crack in the brainwashing, I don't want it anymore. That doesn't mean that it's still not going to take another decade of deconstruction, according to my own model, to get all of that garbage out of my head and out of my life. So I ran into Rebecca, who calls herself White Woman Whisperer.
Yep, yep.
Literally the second I saw that name, I said, oh, thank deities I don't believe in that she exists, because I need that. And I think so many of my white women sisters out there who are trying to deprogram from the cult of white supremacy also need you. So thank you so much for being here and for being willing to have these very hard emotional discussions. I know it means a lot to people, and we're already starting to get so many comments of people saying that they love this.
I love that. And I love hearing that. And I just, I want to make learning about your socialization as easy as and accessible as possible and help us all kind of understand each other and see each other a little bit differently, maybe. And just, yeah, see our indoctrination and try to undoctrinate together, because it's impacted me. And if it's impacted me, then I know the white women have been impacted. And I, not every Black person should be doing this, and I want to and I can, so I do. I'm so grateful that it's like catching on and I can see changes based on things I'm doing. So it's very exciting.
Yes, ma'am. And I love this analogy for deconstruction of knitting. It's like when you've knitted something, when something has been created, painstakingly created, right? And then you
Yeah.
realize something went wrong, right? There's this moment that every crafter knows where you've like gone 15 inches in front and then you realize you dropped a stitch or you did a mistake of some kind. And you
Mm-hmm.
have this decision. Do I just keep going? Or do I go back, take out all that work, and redo it? And I have just learned now through 35 years of knitting that like it's always worth it to go back, undo that bad stitching, and just fix yourself and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So many of us will tell ourselves, oh, nobody will ever notice. And I've learned, like, trust me, people will notice, right?
Right.
So this
And
is
you'll know. You know,
exactly, exactly.
and sometimes it's just good for you to say, yeah, and not to focus on the loss aversion. And I find that that's something I have to battle regularly is this fear of what are we going to lose if we don't do this, and the weight that we hold around, oh, I'm going to go back. I did all this and now I have to go back. Yeah, it's okay. Like it's part, you didn't know that this was going to happen. Yeah, but it's part of the plot. Like you, what do you mean? You have to have some story and texture. So if it's all going, I think there's something, smooth seas don't make good sailors or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I get asked all of the time by people, and they're like, because I knit in all my videos. I knit while I am walking around. I just spent 2 weeks walking around Portugal knitting. It was so fun.
Oh,
But
that
people
sounds
will say they'll be like, "Oh, so what if you drop a stitch?" Right? And it's like, well, first of all, the more I practice, the more I do, the less I drop stitches, the less I do bad work. But second of all, if I drop a stitch, okay, then I go back and drop a stitch. Then I go back and fix it. And trust me, with this fuzzy yarn I'm working with, I've had to take out my entire panel and start again because it's so hard to like grab up your stitches. But it's
yeah.
always worth it. It's way better now than the first of these jackets I made where I didn't realize all the holes I left and I had to go back and patch them up in the like finished adult product.
Right. And it's just realizing how why are you even doing it, right? Because if it's just to finish the project, then sure, bust through it and don't care. But that's not why you picked up the needles and the yarn. You picked up because you want to knit. So okay, now you're re-knitting something. You were gonna be knitting anyway. So it's just
You're so right.
accepting
My
it.
husband, when we first got together, my husband used to get so bothered when I would take something out. He'd be like, seriously, you're taking all that out? That was all that work. And after a while, I just looked at him. I was like, babe, as soon as I finish this project, I'm picking up the next one. It's not like,
And at what
you know,
point you go, all right, I could just like it's not, but you have to push through a little bit of something at first to say, no, okay, I'm gonna just undo it. It's not nothing. And it's,
and
validating that feeling.
one other thing that behooves us to talk about in this analogy, I think we've talked about this before on our show, is the pride you feel in something you made yourself. And for any kind of deconstruction, I recommend to people do art. I did some tile painting in Portugal, and now me and my daughter are just painting hundreds of
Oh,
tiles. But like something that you created, right, is something that you're so much more proud of. I'm so proud of this podcast that we are creating together. I'm so proud of the lessons that you have taught me and the better perspective that I have toward the world
mhm.
than I would be, honestly, even if I had just been raised in a place that was like totally great and perfect. Cause like I'm doing this work. And eventually, when my entire brain is cleansed from all the gross white supremacy, like I did that. I get to be proud of that.
Right. That is such a journey in itself. And I'm doing it as well. And like, that's why I enjoy doing my Patreon videos, because it's almost like a record of the excavation, that's what I call it, of like white supremacist beliefs from all my value systems. I have to kind of like detach the tenets. As I go through them, I'm realizing it's almost like therapy to challenge these beliefs. Do I really believe in individualism? And what does that mean if I do? How does this align with what I say my goals are, what I want to see in the future? And it changes my actions and my behaviors. And I'm thinking, oh, a couple of years ago, I would have been so bothered by just certain things that I don't even let enter my orbit anymore, just because I don't respect the value of it as much as I used to. It's like mediocre white men's opinions, you know, when I center white women, because I do feel like white women are going to be are we're women. I see us as women. I didn't grow up thinking we were that different. It's, you know, being black is realizing you're black when white people come and treat you differently. And then you start learning what it is to be black. It's not on its own a problem, right? So I'm
Yeah.
just like, come on, we can do this. And I know what so many white women don't want to be as problematic as they are, but I also am aware that there are black people who, for safety reasons, will never get close to seeing that this isn't on purpose, and it's not their responsibility to humanize people who have brutalized their families for centuries. You know, so I'm like, I got this, because I thought, and I'm doing the work already. So let's just do it together. Let's talk about these value systems.
Absolutely. And this is also why I should say for the listeners that on this podcast, we are trying to do it as much as possible without asking Rebecca to have to relive her traumas and her horrors, but to talk about it from the aspect of white women and what we've learned. And, you know, interestingly for me, I kind of had the experience you're talking about the other way around. I grew up in an American cult commune in Brazil, and
Mm.
because of living in a mostly segregated way, I didn't really have this concept of myself as a white woman until I entered America and started being treated like that. You know, so one example is I say I was cultured both ways about the police.
Mm.
Growing up in a cult, I was taught that the police were bad. They were out to get me. I needed to lie to them or be very careful, be on my best behavior. You never call, right? A lot of the things that I
Mm.
think Black children are taught about police in America. But then coming into America, and there's a powerful chapter on this in my video book, Un-American, which you can find linked here, where I have my first encounter with the police and I am treated as a white girl, very, very different from the brown boy that I am with. And I, you know, don't really consciously understand this for about 20 years. But you know, looking back when I wrote this project, I was able to see that, like, even though I wasn't thinking of things in black and white terms, the world was, the American world was, and I was being treated that way every day, which was better. You know,
Yeah.
I used to not have the words to explain, but it was like, I'm this indigent teenager from nowhere. Why are people treating me so well? Right. And it
Yeah.
was the whiteness, right? People look at a white 16-year-old girl and they're like, oh, I want to help you.
That's so funny. I mean, it's not funny, but you know what I mean. Like, it's because I was, you know, my break with my innocence of post-racial America was I had to experience it myself and go into corporate America and be gaslit and whatever. And I'm going, why is everybody treating me so poorly? Like, I'm doing such a good job, and I do all the things, and I look at up all the right ways to say it. Very autism of me, but you know, if I say this and this and that, and then I had to just go, oh, racism. This
Yeah.
is what they're talking about. And it's so hard
I
to like
had
look at.
a similar, not as intense, but sort of similar experience in the military, where I went into the military during a time of gender segregation. And I it's like I truly believed that if I did what they said, if I worked harder and jumped higher and ran faster, that they would respect me as much as the men. And honestly, one of the things I tell young women going into the military now, especially officers, is just don't expect it. Don't expect to be treated equally, no matter how hard you work, because that part
The
really
myth,
broke my heart
the myth of
so much.
meritocracy. I don't know if that's a phrase, but I just thought of it and I
That
love
is
the alliteration.
absolutely a phrase, and that is what, to flash again,
Yeah.
mediocre. There's another great book called Brotopia by Emily Chang, and it's about
Oh, I've
women's
heard of that.
experience in tech. And it's literally called Brotopia, the myth of meritocracy.
Oh, I love.
You know,
Okay, okay.
and
I got it.
I got this great one when people are like, I'm a self-made man or woman. I just kind of pause and I lean forward and I go, oh my God, that is so cool. I always wanted to meet the person who founded America.
I love a fake enthusiasm. That's
Well, the phrase "pull yourself up by your bootstraps" started
yeah.
off as a satirical phrase because it's something that's actually impossible to do. You
Oh my
can't
god.
grab yourself by the boots and pull yourself up. It's impossible.
Oh, that's so. You're right. Well, now I hate it even more.
My other fun one to break people's minds with is that type A personality comes from a medical study where this guy said, these two types of men, one type of them die more. And it's the type that are stressed out and always on and always going. And it was the type A. The type A men were the ones who died more of heart disease and other man killing diseases. But that in American culture became who you're supposed to try to be.
And if that doesn't say everything, between that fact that American cheese is more plastic than food and isn't allowed in certain countries and is wrapped in plastic and then is further then encased in more plastic, there's these random things that I'm like, that's called American cheese. They're
I
telling us exactly
know.
what
And
it
I
is.
just came back from Portugal and I'm still in my culture shock of how bad the food here is. I do want to say that in Ijoma's book also, there is a very interesting study that she talks about, which I'm going to bring straight back to Kamala Harris and why I am so excited to have a woman as a commander in chief. And the research was done on risky behavior. And so the hypothesis is that normal human beings should choose middle of the road behavior, right? All else being equal, because if you choose too risky, you could die. If you choose too safe, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So we
Mhm.
should choose middle of the road behavior. And for women, we do. And for men, when they're with women, they choose middle of the road behavior. When they are with by themselves, they choose middle of the road behavior. Guess what they choose when they're with other men?
Risky behavior.
Every single time. We were talking about this in my master's degree, and all my peers are like, oh my gosh, think about business, right? Think about family. And I was like, y'all, think about war. Like,
Yeah. What? What?
like
What?
think about, and this to me is, I am,
I think
all
about
of the specifics about Kamala Harris aside, I am so excited to get a woman in the White House. I mean, I had to have a come to Jesus moment with myself when Carly Fiorina was running and ask myself if I would vote for a Republican if she was the only woman candidate, because
Mm.
I think it's so important when we talk about glass cliffs and glass ceiling, it is going to be so important to have a woman at the top and what that is going to change, especially when we think about the fact that mediocre white men
Yeah.
have run everything this whole time. And she, just as a woman, she is just on this one thing, she's bringing a completely different lived experience with that. Like, she's not going to feel the need to prove herself manly
Hmm.
by choosing risky behavior.
I hope.
You do too.
You know, like it's way less likely. That's obviously, you know, where I would put things. And I did create an analogy about how I feel about, you know, the Kamala, and in the grand scheme of things and zoomed out, it's like I it's like there was one restaurant in the whole country, and one restaurant chain, and we have to decide who's going to run it next. Now, it's always been whites only and terrible, and it's been bland food, and they've never cleaned, and they don't wash their hands. But we're going to get a new chef, guys. Okay. Yes. Right. Cool. We do want Black people in there. But, like, are y'all going to listen to her when she comes and says, "Hey, you need to wash your hands"? Are you going to wash your hands? Yeah.
Right.
And this is the only restaurant. So, like, people are all going there and everyone's getting sick because of all this stuff. So I want people to stop getting sick, of course. So I do want it cleaned. But I also want to make sure we're all taking care of our neighbors who are sick now at home because they came to this restaurant. I go a little bit more in depth in a Patreon video I have, but it's like I just want to always keep "and" at the forefront, because it does come down to people are going to be upset.
Yes. And
You know?
definitely go follow Rebecca on Patreon. The links will be in the show notes wherever you're experiencing this video or audio. And there is a study that shows this very directly, which we may have talked about in a previous episode, but it shows that you need 3 women on a board in order to get the benefit of one woman's voice. Because if you only have one woman, she has to play the game, right? The first person to break the glass ceiling still has to play the game. Just
Yeah.
like, so Kamala, as the second Black president, is going to have more opportunity to do things specifically that Black people need than Barack Obama did as the first,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you have 2 women or minorities on a board, they are pitted against each other. They are not against each other, they are pitted against each other.
Yeah.
And so it's not until you get 3 individuals of a given minority demographic that they each get an individual voice and are not, as we said, like seen as representing their entire race or demographic.
Uh-huh.
But I am very much with you, and that my first reaction to seeing that she was going to be the candidate was, oh, I'm so scared for her, right? Like, she is
Mm-hmm.
going to, just in the election season alone, she is going to have so much misogynoir thrown at her, that it is going to be painful. And I've kind of been heartened to see my people getting behind her in a pretty big way. And that's definitely one of the things I wanted to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
Was I've seen a lot of Black creators, I think you as well, talking about how, like, stop saying you're an ally. It's not about being an ally, it's about being an accomplice. And I really
Mm-hmm.
like this. I think it goes with my analogy of, like, hey, white women, let's be the Karens of anti-racism, right? Like,
Right.
this is not your woman running for president and I need to be an ally. This is not your job to take down white supremacy and I need to be an ally. If anything,
Right.
it's my job, but I need to be an accomplice. I need to be a mission partner that is in
Mm-hmm.
it with you, having
Right.
these conversations, but very, very, I think, importantly, bring in the white men. Getting very real and very honest with the white men who are in our beds about what we expect from them. And by the way, white women, it's never a bad time for a little Lysistrata, which is the sex strike. I don't know if you know about this, but this is a Greek mythology where women wanted a war to end, and so they stopped having sex with the men, and they ended the war. Also, in Ireland, I believe they've done this twice, but in Ireland, when they wanted their Equal Rights Amendment to pass, no, sorry, Iceland, when they wanted
Yeah.
their Equal Rights Amendment to pass, which we failed to pass in the US because of white women,
Mm-hmm.
they went on a sex strike and they passed it in one day. One day. So I am
And then
married
with the
to
same
a
thing.
white man
Yeah.
who did not vote the right way, in my opinion, in the last two elections. Didn't vote for that guy, but he didn't anyway.
Yeah.
I have made it for, I am glad that he has deconstructed so much, and he is probably leading the yes we can charge more strongly than I am. But, I have made it very clear that my expectation of him is to educate himself on misogynoir and on what is going on, and also to call out his friends,
Right.
right? Otherwise, you will not be coming back to my bed.
And I think it's realizing that, so the reason allyship I think is so problematic or whatever, is because you're seeing it as help. You are helping us, as if you aren't harmful, being harmed, so integral to what is happening, and will be liberated by the overall liberation of everybody. Like this is, we're helping. I'm helping you. Right. And I
Yeah.
think that's why in my work I am not trying to convince anybody, and convincing I think is something I'm not going to do. I'm not going to convince you to care about Black people. I'm just going to say, if you do, this is what I think you should know.
Right.
And
Well,
then
this
moving
is
forward.
also where I think the cult scholarship comes into this, and we've talked about this for sure, but the sacred assumption, right? So in
Mm-hmm.
every like coercive control environment, there's one thing that you must believe in order to be a member in good standing of that group. And I get this question all the time. Well, you're a white woman, so why would you want to take down white supremacy? And my answer is because it's not better, right? The sacred assumption of white supremacy is that I, as a white woman, will be better off than you, as a Black woman, if I play their game. But
Yeah.
the answer is it's not better, right? I am better off than you, but I'm not better off, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
truly, firmly believe that. And by the way, that help thing, that is a tip for households that I have been using a lot. But it's, hey, women, stop asking not only your husband, but even your children to help you.
Mm.
Like, they are not helping you. It is not your job. Right? So it's not, hey babe, will you help me by washing the dishes? It's, hey babe, the dishes need to be washed. And honestly, you should have eyes to see that yourself. Uh,
I'm not great at that stuff. I'm here. I just look at, oh, Fran's not even over here. See, I can't even get control of my own little doggy area. But it's, I think it's, realizing, like, owning your own stuff, and then, like, just having better expectations of those around you, but also that they will be okay if called out. Like you said, like, call the bluff, cringe through it, whatever you got to do, because there is a perspective you are missing if you aren't doing that. Like, you're missing out is how I see. Like,
yeah.
you have no idea how silly you look, if you don't
So
do this learning.
So you'll love this because I asked my husband, of course, to go on my YouTube channel and just run the videos so that I could get my hours up, which just monetized.
Nice.
And he listened to, I think, our first or our second episode, and he was like, "Whoa, she was like pretty harsh on you," which I don't feel, by the way, at all. We were direct, right? I say some things that have my white womaning all over them, and you stop me, and you, in my opinion, very kindly, I think we have created a safe space here.
Yeah.
But as a white man, he's not used to hearing that, right? And he's not
Yeah.
used to hearing his very opinionated wife just paused in her where she is and kind of like put in her place, which is of course
Hmm.
what I am here for and what I have asked you to do. But going back to what you were saying, this is also another white woman thing that we do is we use the language of attack and the language of war when that is really in fact not the case. And one of the reasons we started this was because you got literally attacked by white women for making a comment to
It's
educate
canceled
fans.
if you think about it.
Meanwhile, I got rewarded
Yeah.
by unpacking my own racism.
Yeah. And I think that there's so much work in just acknowledging some of the facts. that there's been so much intellectualizing, like I say all the time, where instead of just like, hey, this is my experience as a white woman and I am noticing things I didn't notice before and I'm grateful, just kind of saying exactly what's going on. And I think that's how I've approached things. Whereas like you want to know and I want to tell you, but I do find it like not surprising that he would say that. I've heard that a lot. I do think there is another element between of like Black woman direct communication, whereas
Right.
neurodivergence is never attributed to me also. Like it's always, we don't really, and we can talk about that as like the whole scientific and medical racism is a whole other, kind of journey. But I always just think like, no, this is how it's also Black women. I just realized Black women talk to their friends as, they just say what they're thinking. They'll tell you,
But
girl.
that's also part of being a white woman. I
Mm,
think there's a reason that it was so powerful for us all to watch Kamala Harris look at a white man, Mike Pence, and say, "Excuse me,
uh,
I'm speaking." Right? Which, by the way, was when I was educated about digital blackface, because then I shared
mm,
a meme of her saying that and I got schooled on that. But as white women, we are supposed to be nice all of the time, right? As I say in my chapter in the book I'm working on the skinny white woman, that good women are supposed to be quiet, skinny, and a light shade of beige. You
mm.
know, we are supposed to go along to get along. We are people pleasing. We are fawning. We're even taught to speak in that high little baby voice, right? And
Yeah.
it is so first of all, with the neurodivergence, right, it was almost funny for me to realize that, like, oh, I'm autistic with ADHD, so even though I have spent 33 years as a people pleaser before I realized my neurodivergent, like, people didn't like me anyway. It doesn't, and it's so freeing to understand that I can just, like, when someone is being sexist, misogynistic, garbage to me, I can just stop them and not take it.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, Black women have been absolutely a model to me in how you don't have to try to make yourself smaller, and calling people out is like, maybe it's going to feel uncomfortable, but it's going to be fine.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. They're going to be fine. And if they want, it's going to make us stronger. Like that's, how things are supposed to work in community. There's supposed to be conflict and resolution in different forms of relationships. And what's interesting is, so how we talked about when all I said was, Black women would often prefer a white man in the room versus a white woman. Um, that that it was so clear to me and so obvious. I knew a Black woman was going to say. That's why I felt comfortable enough to say it. Was met with an equal level of shock on the side of white women. I think that's something that's correlated to that dissonance. There's something between the obviousness of on Black women's side and the shock and dismay and sadness and my heart is broken and all that stuff with white women, that they don't also see how nice I actually am. Because Black women all the time to me are like, I don't know how you do this. You have the patience of a saint, which I do not. I think like I actually moderate my tone a bit because I know what I'm doing. I know who I'm talking to. Now, if I was talking about white women to my girlfriends, it it wouldn't sound the same, right? I mean, I still don't think it would be angry, lashing out, like attacking. It would just kind of, I don't know. I don't know. I just think I'm nice
I get this
for
comment sometimes
things.
on my channels where people are like, if you were like a little less sarcastic or whatever, like, you would get through to people more. Like, people don't get shamed out of cults. And I'm like, you know, like, I'm going to stop you there and suggest to you that that's not who I'm speaking to. Like, I'm speaking to people that are already
Yeah.
into their deconstruction. If it reaches some other people, that's awesome. But if you are being offended by my tone, maybe just stop and think that you don't have the prerequisites to take this course yet.
Absolutely. Not everything is for everyone. And even not every one of my videos is for everyone that views them. You know, I think if you get it, you get it. Maybe come back to it later. I don't know. But I'm just sharing myself. So some of it is, I don't know always what's culturally Black and what isn't until I start seeing in the comments that some people just really don't know what I was saying. And that's fine. I'm okay with that.
That's part of why having these conversations, right? Because the
Yep.
video that brought us to this conversation for you was the white men versus white women thing. For me, it was saying that I realized that the way that I walked was racist after moving to a state, Maryland, with far more Black people and constantly crashing into Black people. And
Mm,
as soon
mm.
as I said this, I mean, Black women in the thousands were responding, of course it is. You do it all the time,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I can pause and take some time and see that. But part of it, what you were saying, I think it is that obviousness. It is, right?
Mhm.
Like almost similar to when you're deconstructing your neurodiversity and you figure something out and you're like, oh my God, you go to your spouse or your friend and you're like, did you know that like I do this and this and this and this? And they're like, yeah, I
Yeah.
know you. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's autism. Right. But to them, they're just like, yeah, of course you're like this all the time. You
Right,
know?
right. And you don't know because that's how you are, right? And you don't know that other people have different perspectives of you and of situations and how they would do things. And I think that's all I really, but in whiteness, that blank canvas thing that you're taught like you get to choose how you are throughout the world. Like it's a choice to be a good all the time and just say the right things. But no, you've been socialized. I can see that you're white and I can see in what you say. That's why digital blackface doesn't really work. But white people think they can just say, I'm Black, and this thing that is very obviously not something a Black person would say. And it's like, you're not going to get to the point where you sound like us. Just be you, have your community, and speak to your white experience. Instead of, you could speak to anti-Blackness within you and in your, without speaking about Black people, because I think that's where things get a little, we don't need a translator type of thing.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I have this with men all the time on my channels. Like it's an anonymous account and I pause them in the mansplaining and I put them in their place and they're like, oh my God, you're so sexist. Why are you assuming my gender? Because, sir, and like it's so funny when it's their name is Benjamin, right? Or you're like, because, sir, a woman wouldn't do this to me, right? A lot of times they are questioning my expertise without knowing anything about who I am. And I'm a highly Googleable person. And
Mm-hmm.
like a woman wouldn't do that. Right? Like I've never had a woman show
Well,
up
for
on my
you.
channel and just be like, what do you know? Like
Yeah.
I just haven't had that. Right?
They do
Like
it to me all the
because
time, just so you know. But yeah.
I'm sure, yes, yes. Um,
No, yeah, yeah.
there's the whiteness, right?
Yeah.
But
But that's
um
yeah, you're proof
it's like
exactly
it's
right.
called mansplaining for a reason, right?
Right.
And this is how we
Right,
know.
right,
And that's
right.
one of
Mhm.
the things that has been honestly motivating me to do this work is that, no matter how much I want to not be a racist, no matter how much I want to be an accomplice, and I want you to see me and not be scared,
Mhm.
my language gives it away, right? The way that I operate through the world in my white privilege is what gives it away. That's why 50% of my friends are not Black women yet.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with being white. I think that whiteness has very toxic, like deleterious, like just like sucks your soul out from you. And I think that's something that would be benefit you to not have. But being white, you have to accept it because there's privilege and then you have a platform, and that is where the opportunities come in for you to make an impact. And you have, and this is clear. It's just having the conversations. It can be this simple, and realizing like, I'll make it through, I'll be fine. Like what's the worst thing that could happen to you is that I tell
I'll
you,
tell
hey,
you,
that comes from whiteness.
Well, and I get, I think what people are so afraid of, and I get this comment on all of my videos, which is a black person being like, "Come on, girl, you knew, like you knew you were doing this, right?" Especially on the video that got 20,000 views, which is about how I married a man who was a white supremacist, and I
Mm-hmm.
truly didn't, right? And what people don't understand is how isolated and separated I was in a cult at 19 years old, right? Like I did not see the red flags. I did not. But the worst thing that is going to happen is people going, "I don't believe you." Or they say, "Oh my God, who raised you?" And then my answer is a white supremacist sex cult raised me. That's why I'm
Right. Exactly. And you have to kind of be prepared for Black people to say, hey, that's racist. And you were racist.
And I also think this whole concept of cancel culture is also part of like conservatism and white supremacy.
Yep.
Because let me tell you, I have white womaned all over social media many times. I always joke that every 5 months I'm apologizing, and it feels like garbage. I cry. Sometimes I want to jump off something. It sucks, and then I'm fine.
Mm.
And as long as I apologize and try to do better, I have never once lost someone from my life or had like actual tangible negative reactions other than just my hurt feelings.
Right. And I think that's where I always come back to like believing in yourself and not believing yourself at those moments where you're like crying and you're upset and you're like, this is the worst thing in the world. From experience, and you can zoom out and say, I'm not going to believe this feeling. I'm going to have this feeling. It's valid. It hurts to have that existential, like, I did a bad, people are looking at me. But then you have to question where all of that comes from. Because if a Black woman has spoken to you about something you did that she doesn't want you to do again, that means she thinks you want to know that. And she thinks you want to be a safer person because like I said, one of my videos was like, we would talk about you where you can't hear us because we've been doing it all this time. And if we think you're listening, we're going to tell you. And your accepting of that is a shock to us, but like a beautiful, hopeful, the bar is so low.
Yeah.
All you have to say is, sorry, I'm not going to do it again.
Yes. And
That's
definitely want to point out for my fellow white women that like it also takes a lot of bravery on the behalf of that Black person to point things out to you, because the most likely reaction they are going to get is, you verbally or sometimes even physically like hitting back.
crying,
Um,
mostly crying.
Instead of crying, right? White women's tears, incredibly
Mm-hmm.
powerful.
Which don't
Um,
always involve tears. I think some of us neurodivergent people get confused. They think that means you actually are crying. You don't have to be actually crying to activate, because white women tears you could have leaned into when your husband said, oh, she's been kind of harsh. You could have been like, right? That would have been, kind of,
yeah.
who knows, that just the slip into victim is very
Yeah.
easy.
And this is where it interacts with cult stuff for me too, because one of the most recent times where I white womaned all over threads and I was holding my ground, like I did not intend for that to come off this way. You don't know me. And I realized I was sounding like our cult parents when we tell them something that we're going through, like this hurt me, like I didn't get what I needed. And they just go straight to, oh, what? So I'm a bad parent now?
Mm-hmm.
Or they are like, well, I didn't know. And one of the things I've started saying is, well, now,
Yeah.
right? Now. I just had the other week, I have a shirt, I sell these sassy t-shirts, and I have a shirt that says she's a Jezebel, which was intended to be an ex-evangelical thing of like, they call us Jezebels anytime we want to just like be our own woman. And so I'm owning that. And
Yeah.
somebody said to me, hey, be careful with that shirt, because when Black women get called a Jezebel, it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not wearing that shirt anymore. Like, to me, that's just easy. I think this is maybe the neurodiverse thing where I don't need to be right. I need to be correct. But it's so easy for me when somebody tells you, like, hey, when I got told what digital blackface is, cool. I just have never shared a GIF of a Black person and I haven't needed to, and it hasn't impacted my life, right? Oh, this word. Yes, I know in white evangelical circles that is taken very differently, but that is not the only circles that I move in. So I'm not going to wear that shirt anymore.
Right. And I wonder how much that actually does connect to where the Black community, because Jezebel, it has a lot to do with biracial children and biracial women as well, and like the sexuality of, because
It
that's
100% does, right?
so I
But
feel like it probably is connected. I don't know, because
no,
religion
it
wasn't.
does. I am this month actually for my cult book club. We are doing a book called Pure, which is about, essentially white evangelical purity. But then
Mm.
I also found a book about Black women and purity and the way that it's weaponized against them differently. Right.
Oh
And
yeah.
again, it's like it comes from the same place. Oh my God, is everything about white supremacy? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
We're trying
It
to make it easy
comes
for you.
it comes from the same place, but it's
Yep.
just one of those things that, like, I, as a white woman, I was never going to just inherently understand the difference in what me being called a Jezebel and you being called a Jezebel is.
Yeah.
So, only thing I could do is believe Black women when they say it's not the same.
Right. And that's such a big, it's like, the answers are simple, not easy. It's so much of it is holding and stopping, and then stopping. It's just stopping yourself to see where things are. And a sense of urgency is a tenet of white supremacy, and jumping in and saying, this very moment is this is urgent. This is the only thing that matters right now. It's like, hold on.
Oh my God.
Where is this
I
coming
love
from?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I've talked about this with, like, demanding an immediate response is part of coercive control. Like when
Yes.
parents just expect their children to jump to as soon as they say, in the military we have that, right? In every situation of coercive control, demanding an immediate response benefits the person with the chokehold on power. I've
Mm.
just not seen this tied to white supremacy in that
Yeah,
way.
sense of urgency is so strong, and I see it so often now. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. But it makes you abandon yourself
It
for
makes you think
whatever is
of
in front of you.
makes me think of when they're trying to sell you a timeshare, or like anytime you're getting the hard sell. So my husband and I, we were in Costa Rica recently and we did the timeshare breakfast because they gave us $500 in massages. Okay. Like it was a legit deal. But we
Yeah,
told ourselves, we're like, of course we're not going to do it. And don't get
yeah,
me wrong, make it sound so good that we were doing the math and we were thinking. But all what we kept saying to them as they hard sell you and hard sell you and hard sell you was like, we don't make $60,000 decisions in 90 minutes. We don't
right.
make $60,000 decisions in 90 minutes, right? Because
Mm,
when we said it like that, it makes it so obvious to ourselves that it's such bullshit that they're trying to demand. The reason they're demanding an immediate response is because they want you to do it before you can go and think better of it.
right.
Like
It's not to your benefit.
there's no there's no good reason that people are demanding your immediate response for things. Like if
Limited time opportunity,
you don't need to
once
be,
in a lifetime. Like all those like culty signals for like, you have to right away, and the limited time opportunity, you're never gonna get this chance again. Why?
it's even
Why?
so funny when they're like, oh, well, what if it sells out? Like, trust and believe. If you have a product of any kind that is so popular it sells out, you can make it again. Someone will do I sold out my paperback on TikTok. And guess what? You can still get paperbacks because they
Yeah,
printed more.
but it feels like now or never.
It's just never is, and another good one here is I was watching a magic movie and there was a legilimens, someone who reads minds.
Okay.
And when she's on the side of the good guy, she's not important at all. She has like a very low level job. But as soon as she goes over to the bad side, she's
Mm.
extremely important. And I explain that as there's no legitimate reason for surveillance, for constant surveillance, not even of your own children, right? It is used to break people. It is used for oppression. This is part of why cults use purity requirement, what we were talking about, which is purity, not just sexual purity, but any black and white rules of we do this, we don't do this, we don't put this in our hair, in our bodies, in our minds, in our vaginas, like all of those are used to make you put yourself under surveillance and put other people under surveillance. Right. So like Mormons will give each other these really creepy back rubs while they're hugging each other because they're checking to see if they're wearing their underwear, their religious underwear.
Oh no. That is
Let me
the
tell you,
whitest thing I have ever a
it's so
creepy
creepy.
hug to
It's so
check your underwear.
that's also how purity culture goes into, pedophilia and sexual harassment. But
Ah,
in the military, in basic training, the number one thing people were saying throughout the 11 weeks as they're breaking us is just, oh, I need privacy. I need to go sit in a room by myself. And it was funny for me because lack of privacy didn't bother me, not at all. I'd only had 4 years in college where I'd even had my own room, right? So it was just like, I'm already this broken. I don't even get it. But going back to these things, right? Like demanding immediate answers, constantly surveilling people, or having these purity requirements that make it so that you're always having to be watching and enforcing, like these are means of breaking people down, and
yeah,
they don't have legitimate reasons.
it's just, and then it becomes, which I think we are at this point like a self-sealing system. And
Yeah.
I think that, and I love that term. I think that was an Amanda Montel. I don't know if she made that term, but the we have given over our agency to like the system itself, and we're just like looking. Paternalism is another tenet of white supremacy, where we're looking to the adultier adults to help us be a good adult. But like those guys, they went to segregated schools, so I need you who went to an integrated school to have more faith in yourself and believe in yourself a little bit more. And like, I think just, with alignment and understanding how we can, with Kamala in office, there could be at least a conversation. It's what some people say, it's like choosing your adversary. I'd much rather have the person I want to ask things from to be a Black woman than to be anything else.
Even from what you were saying, right? Like putting all of our hopes on Kamala, right? But I guarantee that you are far more liberal and advanced and, sort of developed in many ways than she is, because she is from an older, more conservative generation. She had to play the game in order to get where she's going.
Yeah.
There's interesting research on transformational leadership, which is like the cutting edge right now. And transformational leadership is defined by when both the leader and the follower are inherently changed for the better through the leader-follower relationship. And
Cool.
so studies show that, number one, women are better, surprising nobody. But number two, it was that you have to be able to be in the organization for long enough to obtain real power, but you have to be able to hold yourself separate from the organization. And I always say,
Yeah.
like in the army, we all understand this. Like even as a civilian, you probably know 2 veteran men, and like one of them is just a dude who was in the army, and another one is the dude who thinks he is the army. And like
Yeah.
that dude is the more garbage leader. And like from my perspective as a woman in the army, we were always held separate. We were never really included. And so it's actually easier to be a transformational leader as a woman in the
Yeah.
military, because it's so much easier for me to hold myself separate than it is for my husband, for example. And this goes back
Yeah.
to your self-sealing system as well.
Yeah. And I think also just like it reminds me of seeing so I, there was a while I want people to see Black people not as like concepts but more as cousins, right? Like we are laterally connected in terms of human equalness and understanding, and like certain people have strengths and weaknesses and all of that stuff. But I do think if we don't rehumanize the people in our country, then it's going to be hard to see that change, because we're just going to be looking in one direction. It's not a back and forth. Like I would love to have ranked choice voting be a conversation. And I think going in one direction, that is a conversation that could be had with a Black woman president. I don't know. I would like to just even have, because the electoral college, all that stuff. All right. And just looking beyond
Yeah.
having a Black woman do all
Yeah.
the things.
This is something that gives me so much hope. And honestly, this is a theme in my book, Uncultured, that I wrote, where when I was one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team. And it's like, we don't know what is going to change when we let people into the room, right? Like, we argued for 243 years if women were good enough to be men in order to do war. And
Yeah.
then it wasn't until they put us, right? So I have this story in my book where the men all noticed that the sand looks funny, which would have taken me 1,000,000 years. I never would have noticed that the sand looked funny. I noticed that there were no children, right?
Yeah.
We put those two things together. We figured out there was a bomb in the road. But the reason that like my spidey sense was tingled, I even had to ask myself. I was like, what was it that I was noticing? And it was
Yeah.
so interesting because I had been telling this story for 2 years, and then I was filming it. And unbeknownst to me, the guy behind the camera was a former special forces dude. And he stops the camera and he's like, you mean to tell me that none of the men noticed that there were no children? We get briefed on that all the time as an indicator of danger. And I was like, yeah, you're right. This is going to be part of the story when I tell it again. Because I had to think about it. I was like, what was it? It's not like, oh, I'm just a woman and I notice children more. It was the fact that when you're deployed to Afghanistan for a year, you see no children for an entire year unless you leave the base. So I would go weeks or months without seeing children at all, whereas these men that are leaving the compound see them all the time. Second,
Um,
girl children would be able to tell that I was a girl, which even the adults often couldn't. But so the girl child, their eyes would light up when they saw like a girl soldier because it was just so foreign to them. And so I looked forward to that. Right. But it's one of these things that like it was so subconscious that had you come to me and said, okay, Daniella, we want your perspective as a woman. Tell us what to look for. That
and,
wouldn't have been the top thing. Right. So it's like we
yeah.
need to have seats at the table. We need to be empowered to speak up because we were told over and over again by our leader, like nothing is too silly. Actually, you all being untrained and unexposed is a benefit because you're going to see new things.
Mm.
Um, and all of that to say, like, we don't even know. We are thinking of some big things that we think is going to change when a woman makes it into the White House, but we
Right.
can't
We
even
have no idea.
begin to like really understand the things that are going to change because of what a different perspective she is going to bring into every single interaction that she has.
Yeah. And just how the conversations between people in the everyday will
Yeah.
go will be interesting.
And this was a very interesting one, right? So one of the reasons that American men for years said that women can't be in combat, they said, well, we're at war in Muslim countries and Muslims don't respect women, so we can't have women out there. When we put women out there, we found that for the Afghan people, the hierarchy goes woman, man, American soldier. Right? So to them, they're not seeing me as, oh, what's this woman here? They're seeing
Yeah.
me as an American soldier in American uniform with an American gun and an American eyes in the
Yeah.
sky over my head, right? Like, so this whole concept, right? And I'm sure this is being said about Kamala as well, right? Like, oh, how is she going to interact with countries that, don't respect women, don't respect Black people? Like, everyone respects the president of the United States, even
Yeah.
when it is a buffoon like
But
Trump.
even so, like,
When you are wielding the power, people
mhm,
treat you differently.
yeah. And we aren't respected already.
Right.
Like, I think it's like weird when American men are like, those places don't respect women. And I understand that it's different. I understand. But like, sir, I need you to take a couple seats and realize you are telling me that, which means you don't respect me enough to think I might know what I'm doing.
We have this conversation all the time, and it drives me crazy. They're like, "Oh my God, what do you think foreign soldiers are going to do when they capture women? What do you all do to us?" Every time we talk
Exactly.
about the high rate of rape, every time I talk about the high rate of rape in the military, which is
Mhm.
44%, almost 50% in the numbers, which all of us women know is far too low because it's
Well, yeah.
everyone's. Every time I talk about that, I get all of these like white men clutching their pearls and being like, "Oh, you're talking about foreign soldiers, right?" I'm like, and I always just say, can you imagine? Can you imagine the hellfire we would rain down on a foreign nation for raping some of our soldiers? Like they could be our closest counterparts and we would obliterate them. Of course it's our own people. Like
That's
that was exactly the case. Like you're out here saying that the Afghans don't respect me. Meanwhile, the US Army is still segregated by gender. I'm still
the
not
call is
allowed
coming.
to hold this job because I have a vagina. Like
Uh-huh.
I
It's
always
coming from
say that
inside the house, babe. You
it's
know?
very ironic that going into war in a country that we consider to be 1,000 years behind us in social development is what drug the US Army into the 21st century.
Well, so here's the other thing. Like we say, it always comes back to anti-blackness. So you know how white men created the police because, like, God forbid, these black men are gonna come attack these white women because they're so lusty for them because they're gonna rape the white women. That's why we have police. The runaway slaves, because the runaway slaves are just hungry for white women. Do you know what would happen? Like, can you? And we still have this feeling now. Do you know how far away from white women black men will stay? I mean, yes, there's people in relationships, obviously, but like logistically, that makes no sense. You know who's actually hurting white women? White men.
Right.
You know? And they're also hurting black women. And then I think sometimes white women forget that we exist with your men out in the world when they leave your house. So like if you could rein them in, like you were saying, like I'm talking to white women so white women can get their
Yeah,
home together,
exactly.
raise safer men.
Yeah. White women control the majority of the income in
Mm.
the country, and
Oh,
we
that's interesting.
also have a lot of control because women mostly control the finances in their house, right? Like decide, not make
Yeah.
the money, but decide the
Right.
spending. Women control more spending decisions than men do
Oh,
in this country, and white women are very much that, right? As well as the fact that, like you were saying, like, can you imagine what would happen if you called your boyfriend's friend out who was a white man versus if I did it,
yeah.
right? Like
Or if you
they are
pulled my boyfriend
going,
out, like you know, like
they
that.
are they are going to be a lot more careful. And this is another way where we can use, right, the fact that like we know that white women have been put on this little pedestal and everyone's afraid of what happens when a white woman gets mad at you. So use that to get mad at the white men in
Yup.
your life who
Yup.
are carrying on this racist behavior.
Yeah, don't yell at black. So here's this other thing that just reminded me of is like when you have that energy, I see a lot of the energy pointed at black women because black women are having similar conversations to what white women want to have. So they jump in and start kind of having, but bring that energy away from the marginalized people, bring that to your family, bring that to, you know, your husband, but it's never going to be that you are going to inform a black woman of something and that's not going to be have harm behind it, and like that's okay, you just have to know that and then leave black women alone. But taking a beat and like slowing down helps you see so much that I it's just like I'm always kind of preaching the slow down. Look who
Yeah.
you're talking to. Where's your energy going?
What's your acronym for that?
Wait, why am I talking? Which one? Sorry.
Yeah, that
There's,
one. That
yeah,
one.
there's why am I talking? Yesterday I said take a beat and a seat.
Oh,
Lots of it ends up being like shh, which I didn't realize was going to be so much of the work, but it does kind of make sense.
and I think this is another one I've talked about before, but let's face it, we're going to repeat all these a bunch of times.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that has been so important in my journey, and I think is so crucial in, all the conversations that are going to happen around the election. This also comes from Ijoma Luo in her book, So You Want to Talk About Race. And it's when a person of color, when a Black person tells you something is about race, believe them. And it's like, it's just that easy. It is just as easy as flipping a switch and deciding to believe first, right? So I told you about that study. Wounded Warrior Program did a study that showed that 44% of women in uniform are sexually assaulted. And every woman I have seen hear that study, military woman, says, no way, it's higher, it's everyone I know. And almost every man the one in my house that I have educated, accepted, almost every man I have seen hear that number immediately starts questioning the survey methodology. And I'm like, this is the exclamation point on the rape culture, right?
Yep.
This is what we were talking about with mansplaining, but we do this to Black people. They'll say this, that, and the other. This is my experience. This is about race. And we pretend like we get an opinion on that. I love it every time people are like, well, I disagree. And it's like, we were talking about studies. This is a topic I've started telling people when they say, I disagree on these conversations. I'm just like, this is a topic that has a lot of writing on it. It would be great for you to go educate yourself on this,
I always say, I didn't ask. Because
I love
what? Who? I don't know you, internet stranger. That's so white. But it's like this, I'm the only one they are waiting for my opinion. And that's why I say, why am I talking? Right? Because
another favorite saying I love is that the plural of anecdote is not data. Just because your experiences and the experiences of people don't show you that. Or, my best friend, who's a white woman, but she grew up in Jersey and a much more inclusive, diverse way of being raised than I was. And she said to me a few years back, she was like, don't you ever think you understand the experience. Because she was seeing me reading all the books, right? Reading all these memoirs. I think I know a whole lot about the Black immigrant community in London because I have read many good books about that. But I don't, right? You and I could be having this podcast going for 20 years and I would still not understand what it is like to live one day as a Black woman because that's not an experience that can be approximated. So the only thing I can do is believe you. And then I have found that once I just believe you, right? If you tell me something, I still think about that thing about Black women are pregnant. And of course, if someone touching your pregnant belly and someone touching your Black hair was similar, Black women would have made that analogy. Yeah. Right. That is just one of my best lessons I've learned so far because it's no, I don't know the experience. All I can do is listen and believe. And as much as I want everyone to believe me when I say something's about sexism, I would not do my book with a male editor. I was like, I don't care if I get less money because I don't have the energy to be like, no, this is sexism. I promise you, you're going to see it at the end. I just why I'm not writing a book. Who got it.
You just that perfectly explained why. One of the main reasons I am not writing a book anytime soon is just because I know I will encounter whiteness in the process, and I'm not ready for that. So I'm just making my little video things, and maybe I'm going to have a video book because I love the idea of the word.
Oh, I actually have the idea that after we do this show for a year, maybe it turns into a Hey White Woman book.
I'm here for that.
I definitely get what you're saying. And it is just, I mean, I think we've all experienced trying to tell someone our story and not being believed.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I just want to beg people, like, when someone tells you that something about their experience is because of an intersectionality that you don't have, just believe them. Just like, people don't generally lie about their experiences, right? It's
Yeah.
just too easy to believe them.
And what would be the purpose? Like, white attention is not the goal. And I think sometimes people forget that just like having white people listening to me isn't the goal. It's what changed behavior and safer experiences for everybody, enriched lives. I have deeper things I would like to get, but I also, it reminded me of like, I also have this other acronym I call WALLS, White Woman Whisper Active Listening Lessons. It's a long one, but the first one is like to accept it first and understand it later, like you were saying, like just believe it. The second one, well, I don't know what the order is, but like when someone shares something with you, just appreciate it. Don't try to relate to it. You know, don't relate, appreciate, because you don't need to. So you
Yeah.
don't need to prove to the, and I understand like people with neurodivergence have been, that's how I express that I understand. You don't need
So I
to
was gonna say,
show.
have to work on the.
Yeah, I'm working on it too. And the only reason I come up with them is because and it depends obviously what is happening. If it's an embarrassing thing, yes, please share your embarrassing story. And I think context matters, nuance matters. But if I'm sharing, with the hair thing, if I'm sharing this is how dehumanizing it feels, and you say, yeah, so in this context, when we talk about culty, that's not what I'm not talking about here. I'll definitely let you know if there's ever an issue, but I think on a whole, there is this tendency for white women to try to show that they understand by saying, I also went through it. And when it comes to blackness, no, you didn't. Not even a
Right.
little bit,
And
you know?
this is a very specific thing, and I'll call myself out on this. I took in one of my Harvard classes was power and privilege in systems, and a few weeks into it, the professor had us all do a survey, and she was a white woman, and she asked us to rate whether we thought we talked more, the same, or less than other people in class. And me and two other white women who put the same were taken aside separately and told, like, no, you talk more, and you could step back. And when I tell you it felt like a punch in the face, I mean, it felt really, really bad. But then I went and educated myself on how this is actually a common way that white women bring the spotlight back to ourselves. And I do think I do it sometimes in this podcast, but it's like I get
But
so
that's what
sad
this is.
that I'm like, I understand what you're
Yep.
saying because I've experienced this in a way with sexism. And
Mm-hmm.
I think in this conversation, we both know that the understanding there is that then you've experienced it more and to
Yeah.
an exceptional degree. But
Mm-hmm.
so often we just use that as a way to turn the spotlights back to ourselves. And yes, sexism is a form of discrimination, but it is not the only, and it is certainly not the worst form that gets experienced.
Right. Because gender is also racialized. So, like, you know, being a black woman is distinct from being a white woman. And even see, as I'm saying it, I'm saying distinct from being a woman. That is how deep things go as if I'm not one. Because that's so often the messaging I'm getting from white women sometimes when I share stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's like being a woman. And I'm like, hello, I am one of those too.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
And
And that's just,
just to caveat this to say, we understand neurodiversity. Rebecca and I are both neurodiverse, and I know this is one of the ways that we relate. I still think it's good to understand this concept because even though
yeah,
I understand that I don't mean any harm by it when I do that, it has still improved my relationships and my learning to just like not do that all the time.
yeah, the silence also, there's so much opportunity in that silence. So, like, imagine I'm sharing something with you and I don't share very often. And I share, this thing happened at work and they touched my hair and I just didn't know, how to really process it. And you let me sit in that for a second and go, like, and then I might go, I might start, like, it gives me the space that you want to hear more. And it's just something to consider, because I think there's a fear of silence in whiteness too. There's just a fear of tears. If someone starts crying,
The
it's
immediacy.
okay. Yeah,
That's the
it's just like,
immediacy, right? Like someone says something and I need to make it better. Like I need to do something.
yes, the urgency right there. It keeps you from further connection, because now you're saying, no, 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 I totally get it. And I'm not asking you to get it. I want you to listen to, so that I could verbally process, maybe, because in my neurodivergence, I'm a verbal processor. And sometimes I don't know it till I say it out loud. And now you're here too. And I don't know. And if you say, that's just like this time that something like a guy flirted with me at the bar. I don't know. I just think there's opportunity, and I don't think you're a bad
Let me
person
tell
if
you,
you do it.
the way that I found out that my programming was so white supremacist was the fact that I am a verbal processor, and I have caught stuff coming out of my mouth and literally been like shoved it back in, like, nope, we don't believe that. Like, and
Well,
as soon
yep.
as I said it out loud, I was like, what?
Yeah.
But you
Who said
know,
that?
you have to, there's this concept actually that you have to write something down or put it out in the world in order to think about it abstractly. You have to get it out of your brain. And so this is why I love your recommendation to go sit in your hut of humility and
Yes.
journal. Another great one that I have learned is when you get called out on something and you need to process it, call your white women friends.
Yes.
Don't call your black women friends, because you're
Yes.
asking them to reassure you that you're a good person. And like, you're a good person. That's why they're friends with you. But like, call your white women friends,
Yeah.
talk about
That's
guilt
when you
versus
relate.
shame, right?
Yes. That's when
Um,
you say, "Oh, wait, don't worry, I did the same thing." That's where hit them with a relatable story, not
yes,
with black women.
perfection, perfection. Well, this conversation has been maybe one of our longest. So good. I've learned so much from you as ever.
Yeah.
Going to try to remember to put a definition for both misogynoir and digital blackface in the show notes in case people have questions, because I already see that. I also want to put a little on-air ad here for my other podcast, which is called Cults and the Culting of America. That's where I break down cults very, very in depth. And then here specifically walking through the deconstruction process that is the same for any cult. We just happen to have picked cult of white supremacy. Thank you so much for listening to us today. Please,
Thank
please,
you.
please follow both of us on Patreon, because I would like to see
Please,
you. But
please.
if you are the target audience of this podcast, a white woman, please follow White Woman Whisperer on Patreon, on TikTok, on Instagram. Her stuff is so good. Her analogies are so amazing. And she does it all
Thanks.
like so lovingly, which she does not owe us, but she does. So
Thank you
thank you
so
so,
much.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening and just being open. Like I say every time, like one day at a time. Thank
That's
you.
all we can do. Oh my God, crochets. I can't believe I forgot to say that.
You didn't. You're still recording. See, that's what she needs to be putting forward. They need to get these male PR people out of here. Let's just keep going with the woman things, because why are we listening